a secret plan to balance the budget sometime in a second term? And if so, would you lay out that plan for us tonight?
I have a plan, not a secret plan. As a matter of fact, it is the economic recovery program that we presented when I took office in 1981. It is true that earlier, working with some very prominent economists, I had come up during the campaign with an economic program that I thought could rectify the great problems confronting us, the double-digit inflation, the high tax rates that I think were hurting the economy, the stagflation that we were undergoing. Before even the election day, something that none of those economists had even predicted had happened, that the economy was so worsened that I was openly saying that what we had thought on the basis of our plan could have brought a balanced budget, no, that was no longer possible. So the plan that we have had and that we're following is a plan that is based on growth in the economy, recovery without inflation, and reducing the share that the government is taking from the gross national product, which has become a drag on the economy. Already, we have a recovery that has been going on for about 21 months to the point that we can now call it an expansion. Under that, this year, we have seen a $21 billion reduction in the deficit from last year, based mainly on the increased revenues the government is getting without raising tax rates. Our tax cut, we think, was very instrumental in bringing about this economic recovery. We have reduced inflation to about a third of what it was. The interest rates have come down about 9 or 10 points, and we think must come down further. In the last 21 months, more than 6 million people have gotten jobs. There have been created new jobs for those people, to where there are now 105 million civilians working where there were only 99 million before, 107 if you count the military. So we believe that as we continue to reduce the level of government spending, the rate of increase in government spending, which has come down from 17 to 6%, and at the same time as the growth in the economy increases the revenues the government gets without raising taxes, those two lines will meet. And when they meet, that is a balanced budget.
Mr. President, the Congressional Budget Office has some bad news. The lines aren't about to meet according to their projections. They project that the budget deficit will continue to climb. In the year 1989, they project a budget deficit of $273 billion. In view of that, and in view of the economic recovery we are now enjoying, would it make sense to propose a tax increase or take some other fiscal measures to reduce that deficit now when times are relatively good?
The deficit is a result. It is the result of excessive government spending. I do not, very frankly, take seriously the Congressional Budget Office projections because they have been wrong on virtually all of them, including the fact that our recovery wasn't going to take place to begin with. But it has taken place. But as I said, we have the rate of increase in government spending down to 6%. If the rate of increase in government spending can be held at 5%, we're not far from there. By 1989, that would have reduced the budget deficits down to a $30 or $40 billion level. At the same time, if we can have a 4% recovery continue through that same period of time, that will mean, without an increase in tax rates, that will mean $400 billion more in government revenues. And so I think that the lines can meet. Actually, in constant dollars, in the domestic side of the budget, there has been no spending increase in the 4 years that we have been here.
Mr. Mondale, the Carter-Mondale administration didn't come close to balancing the budget in its 4 years in office either, despite the fact that President Carter did promise a balanced budget during his term.
Good evening from the Municipal Auditorium in Kansas City. I am Dorothy Ridings, the President of the League of Women Voters, the sponsor of this final presidential debate of the 1984 campaign between Republican Ronald Reagan and Democrat Walter Mondale. Our panelists for tonight's debate on defense and foreign policy issues are Georgie Ann Geyer, syndicated columnist for Universal Press Syndicate; Marvin Kalb, chief diplomatic correspondent for NBC News; Morton Kondracki, executive editor of the New Republic magazine; and Henry Truitt, diplomatic correspondent for the Baltimore Sun. Edwin Newman, formerly of NBC News and now a syndicated columnist for King Features, is our moderator. Ed.
Dorothy Ridings, thank you. A brief word about our procedure tonight. The first question will go to Mr. Mondale. He'll have 2.5 minutes to reply. Then the panel member who put the question will ask a follow-up. The answer to that will be limited to 1 minute. After that, the same question will be put to President Reagan. Again, there will be a follow-up, and then each man will have 1 minute for rebuttal. The second question will go to President Reagan first. After that, the alternating will continue. At the end, there will be 4-minute summations with President Reagan going last. We have asked the questioners to be brief. Let's begin. Ms. Geyer, your question to Mr. Mondale.
Mr. Mondale, two related questions on the crucial issue of Central America. You and the Democratic Party have said that the only policy toward the horrendous civil wars in Central America should be on the economic development and negotiations, with perhaps a quarantine of Marxist Nicaragua. Do you believe that these answers would in any way solve the bitter conflicts there? Do you really believe that there is no need to resort to force at all? Are not these solutions to Central Americans' gnawing problems simply, again, too weak and too late?
I believe that the question oversimplifies the difficulties of what we must do in Central America. Our objectives ought to be to strengthen the democracies, to stop communist and other extremist influences, and stabilize the community in that area. To do that, we need a three-pronged attack. One is military assistance to our friends who are being pressured. Secondly, a strong and sophisticated economic aid program and human rights program that offers a better life and a sharper alternative to the alternative offered by the totalitarians who oppose us. And finally, a strong diplomatic effort that pursues the possibilities of peace in the area. That's one of the big disagreements that we have with the President, that they have not pursued the diplomatic opportunities, either within El Salvador or as between the countries, and have lost time during which we might have been able to achieve a peace. This brings up the whole question of what presidential leadership is all about. I think the lesson in Central America, this recent embarrassment in Nicaragua, where we are giving instructions for hired assassins, hiring criminals, and the rest, all of this has strengthened our opponents. A president must not only assure that we're tough, but we must also be wise and smart in the exercise of that power. We saw the same thing in Lebanon, where we spent a good deal of America's assets, but because the leadership of this government did not pursue wise policies, we have been humiliated and our opponents are stronger. The bottom line of national strength is that the president must be in command. He must lead. And when a president doesn't know that submarine missiles are recallable, says that 70% of our strategic forces are conventional, discovers 3 years into his administration that our arms control efforts have failed because he didn't know that most Soviet missiles were on land, these are things a president must know to command. A president is called the commander-in-chief. And he's called that because he's supposed to be in charge of the facts and run our government and strengthen our nation.
Mr. Mondale, if I could broaden the question just a little bit. Since World War II, every conflict that we as Americans have been involved with has been in non-conventional or irregular terms, and yet we keep fighting in conventional or traditional military terms. The Central American wars are very much in the same pattern as China, as Lebanon, as Iran, as Cuba in the early days. Do you see any possibility that we are going to realize the change in warfare in our time or react to it in those terms?
We absolutely must, which is why I responded to your first question the way I did. It's much more complex. You must understand the region. You must understand the politics of the area. You must provide a strong alternative, and you must show strength, and all at the same time. That's why I object to the covert action in Nicaragua. That's a classic example of a strategy that's embarrassed us, strengthened our opposition, and undermined the moral authority of our people and our country in the region. Strength requires knowledge, command. We've seen in the Nicaraguan example a policy that has actually hurt us, strengthened our opposition, and undermined the moral authority of our country in that region.
Mr. President.
Good evening. On behalf of the Commission on Presidential Debates, I am pleased to welcome you to this first presidential debate of the 1988 campaign. I'm Jim Lara of the McNeil-Lara NewsHour. My colleagues on the panel are John Mashik of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Ann Grower of the Orlando Sentinel, and Peter Jennings of ABC News. For the next 90 minutes, we will be questioning the candidates for President of the United States following a format designed and agreed to by representatives of the two candidates. The candidates are Vice President George Bush, the Republican nominee, Governor Michael Dukakis, the Democratic nominee. Our questions this evening will be about equally divided between foreign and domestic policy matters. The first question, by agreement between the two candidates, goes to Vice President Bush. It is a domestic question. You have 2 minutes for an answer, sir. The polls say the number one domestic issue to a majority of voters is drugs. What is there about these times that drives or draws so many Americans to use drugs?
I think we've seen a deterioration of values. I think for a while as a nation we condoned those things we should have condemned. For a while, as I recall, it even seems to me that there was talk of legalizing or decriminalizing marijuana and other drugs, and I think that's all wrong. So we've seen a deterioration in values, and one of the things that I think we should do about it in terms of cause is to instill values into the young people in our schools. We got into this feeling that value-free education was the thing, and I don't believe that at all. I do believe there are fundamental rights and wrongs as far as use, and of course as far as how we make it better. Yes, we can do better on interdiction, but we've got to do a lot better on education, and we have to be tougher on those who commit crimes. We've got to get after the users more. We have to change this whole culture. You know, I saw a movie, Crocodile Dundee, and I saw the cocaine scene treated with humor, as though this was a humorous little incident. And it's bad. Everybody ought to be in this thing. Entertainment industry, people involved in the schools, education. And it isn't a Republican or Democrat or a liberal problem, but we have got to instill values in these young people. And I have put forward a many-point drug program that includes what I would do as President of the United States in terms of doing better on interdiction and in terms of doing better in the neighborhoods. But I think we're all in this together. And my plea to the American people is values in the schools.
Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
I agree with Mr. Bush that values are important.
Good evening. On behalf of the Commission on Presidential Debates, I am pleased to welcome you to the second presidential debate. I am Bernard Shaw of CNN, Cable News Network. My colleagues on the panel are Ann Compton of ABC News, Margaret Warner of Newsweek magazine, and Andrea Mitchell of NBC News. The candidates are Vice President George Bush, the Republican nominee, and Governor Michael Dukakis, the Democratic nominee. For the next 90 minutes, we will be questioning the candidates following a format designed and agreed to by representatives of the two campaigns. However, there are no restrictions on the questions that my colleagues and I can ask this evening, and the candidates have no prior knowledge of our questions. By agreement between the candidates, the first question goes to Governor Dukakis. You have 2 minutes to respond. Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life. I don't see any evidence that it's a deterrent, and I think there are better and more effective ways to deal with violent crime. We've done so in my own state, and it's one of the reasons why we have had the biggest drop in crime of any industrial state in America, why we have the lowest murder rate of any industrial state in America. But we have work to do in this nation. We have work to do to fight a real war, not a phony war against drugs, and that's something that I want to lead, something we haven't had over the course of the past many years, even though the Vice President has been, at least allegedly, in charge of that war. We have much to do to step up that war, to double the number of drug enforcement agents, to fight both here and abroad, to work with our neighbors in this hemisphere, and I want to call a hemispheric summit just as soon after the 20th of January as possible to fight that war. But we also have to deal with drug education and prevention here at home. And that's one of the things that I hope I can lead personally as the President of the United States. We've had great success in my own state, and we've reached out to young people and their families and been able to help them by beginning drug education and prevention in the early elementary grades. So we can fight this war and we can win this war. And we can do so in a way that marshals our forces, that provides real support for state and local law enforcement officers who have not been getting that kind of support, do it in a way which will bring down violence in this nation, will help our youngsters to stay away from drugs, will stop this avalanche of drugs that's pouring into the country, and will make it possible for our kids and our families to grow up in safe and secure and decent neighborhoods.
Mr. Vice President, your 1 minute rebuttal.
Good evening and welcome to the first of 3 debates among the major candidates for President of the United States, sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. The candidates are Independent candidate Ross Perot, Governor Bill Clinton, the Democratic nominee, and President George Bush, the Republican nominee. I am Jim Lara of the McNeil-Lara NewsHour on PBS, and I will be the moderator for this 90-minute event, which is taking place before an audience here in the athletic complex on the campus of Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. 3 journalists will be asking questions tonight. They are John Mashik of the Boston Globe, Ann Compton of ABC News, and Sandra Van Oker, a freelance journalist. We will follow a format agreed to by representatives of the Clinton and Bush campaigns. That agreement contains no restrictions on the content or subject matter of the questions. Each candidate will have up to 2 minutes for a closing statement. The order of those, as well as the questioning, was determined by a drawing. The first question goes to Mr. Perot. He will have 2 minutes to answer, to be followed by rebuttals of 1 minute each from Governor Clinton and then President Bush. Gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening, Jim.
The first topic tonight is what separates each of you from the other. Mr. Perot, what do you believe tonight is the single most important separating issue of this campaign?
I think the principal issue that separates me is that 5.5 million people came together on their own and put me on the ballot. I was not put on the ballot by either of the two parties. I was not put on the ballot by any PAC money, by any foreign lobbyist money, by any special interest money. This is a movement that came from the people. This is the way the framers of the Constitution intended our government to be, a government that comes from the people. Over time, we have developed a government that comes at the people, that comes from the top down, where the people are more or less treated as objects to be programmed during the campaign with commercials and media events and fear messages and personal attacks and things of that nature. The thing that separates my candidacy and makes it unique is that this came from millions of people in 50 states all over this country who wanted a candidate that worked and belonged to nobody but them. I go into this race as their servant, and I belong to them. So this comes from the people.
Governor Clinton, 1 minute response.
And Senator Dole. Got a couple of minutes still before we... Trade notes. Now, Mr. President, Senator, you all, I'm sure, are aware of this. Let me remind you, when we, at 9 o'clock straight up we go on the air, but there's a minute and 15 seconds before I actually say good evening for the networks to put us on the air and all that sort of business. So we're going to get two hard cues, and then we'll know we're on the air is when I say good evening, when we're actually doing the thing, okay? But they might be getting shots and stuff before that.
We're not going to leave, are we?
No.
I was afraid we'd give our openings and we wouldn't be able to do it again.
The audio works, by the way. That's good. Good. Yeah, everything checks out. Pictures are coming out all right. Everything's fine. All right, 1 minute.
Between the major candidates for President of the United States. The candidates are the Republican nominee, President George Bush, the Independent, Ross Perot, and Governor Bill Clinton, the Democratic nominee. My name is Carol Simpson, and I will be the moderator for tonight's 90-minute debate, which is coming to you from the campus of the University of Richmond in Richmond, Virginia. Now, tonight's program is unlike any other presidential debate in history. We're making history now, and it's pretty exciting. An independent polling firm has selected an audience of 209 uncommitted voters from this area. The candidates will be asked questions by these voters on a topic of their choosing, anything they want to ask about. My job as moderator is to, take care of the questioning, ask questions myself if I think there needs to be continuity and balance, and sometimes I might ask the candidates to respond to what another candidate may have said. Now, the format has been agreed to by representatives of both the Republican and Democratic campaigns, and there is no subject matter that is restricted. Anything goes. We can ask anything. After the debate, the candidates will have an opportunity to make a closing statement. So, President Bush, I think you said it earlier, let's get it on.
Let's go.
And I think the first question is over here.
Yes, I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Perot. What will you do as president to open foreign markets to fair competition from American business and to stop unfair competition here at home from foreign countries so that we can bring jobs back to the United States?
That's right at the top of my agenda. We've shipped millions of jobs overseas, and we have a strange situation because we have a process in Washington where after you've served for a while, you cash in, become a foreign lobbyist, make $30,000 a month, then take a leave, work on presidential campaigns, make sure you got good contacts, and then go back out. Now, if you just want to get down to brass tacks, first thing you ought to do is get all these folks who've got these one-way trade agreements that we've negotiated over the years and say, fellas, we'll take the same deal we gave you. And they'll gridlock right at that point because, for example, we've got international competitors who simply could not unload their cars off the ships if they had to comply. You see, if it was a two-way street, just couldn't do it. We have got to stop sending jobs overseas. To those of you in the audience who are business people, pretty simple. If you're paying $12, $13, $14 an hour for factory workers, and you can move your factory south of the border, pay $1 an hour for labor, hire a young 25, let's assume you've been in business for a long time, you've got a mature workforce. Pay $1 an hour for your labor, have no health care, that's the most expensive single element in making a car, have no environmental controls, no pollution controls, and no retirement, and you don't care about anything but making money, there will be a giant sucking sound going south. So if the people send me to Washington, the first thing I'll do is study that 2,000-page agreement and make sure it's a two-way street. One last point here. I decided I was dumb and didn't understand it, so I called a who's who of the folks who've been around it. And I said, why won't everybody go south? They said, we'll be disruptive. I said, for how long? I finally got them up for 12 to 15 years. And I said, well, how does it stop being disruptive? And that is when their jobs come up from $1 an hour to $6 an hour and ours go down to $6 an hour, then it's leveled again. But in the meantime, you've wrecked the country with these kinds of deals. We've got to cut it out.
Thank you, Mr. Perot. I see that the president has stood up, so he must have something to say about this.
The three major candidates for President of the United States. Governor Bill Clinton, the Democratic nominee. President George Bush, the Republican nominee. And independent candidate Ross Perot. I am Jim Lara of the MacNeil-Lara NewsHour on PBS. I will be the moderator for this debate, which is being sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. It will be 90 minutes long. It is happening before an audience on the campus of Michigan State University in East Lansing. The format was conceived by and agreed to by representatives of the Bush and Clinton campaigns, and it is somewhat different than those used in the earlier debates. I will ask questions for the first half under rules that permit follow-ups. A panel of 3 other journalists will ask questions in the second half under rules that do not. As always, each candidate will have 2 minutes, up to 2 minutes, to make a closing statement. The order of those, as well as that for the formal questioning, were all determined by a drawing. Gentlemen, again, welcome, and again, good evening. Yeah. It seems from what some of those voters said at your Richmond debate and from polling and other data that each of you, fairly or not, faces serious voter concerns about the underlying credibility and believability of what each of you says you would do as president in the next 4 years. Governor Clinton, in accordance with the draw, those concerns about you are first. You are promising to create jobs, reduce the deficit, reform the health care system, rebuild the infrastructure, guarantee college education for everyone who is qualified, among many other things, all with financial pain only for the very rich. Some people are having trouble apparently believing that is possible. Should they have that concern?
No. There are many people who believe that the only way we can get this country turned around is to tax the middle class more and punish them more. But the truth is that middle class Americans are basically the only group of Americans who have been taxed more in the 1980s and during the last 12 years, even though their incomes have gone down. The wealthiest Americans have been taxed much less, even though their incomes have gone up. Middle class people will have their fair share of changing to do and many challenges to face, including the challenge of becoming constantly re-educated. But my plan is a departure from trickle-down economics, just cutting taxes on the wealthiest Americans and getting out of the way. It's also a departure from tax and spend economics, because you can't tax and divide an economy that isn't growing. I propose an American version of what works in other countries. I think we can do it better. Invest and grow. I believe we can increase investment and reduce the deficit at the same time if we not only ask the wealthiest Americans and foreign corporations to pay their fair share, we also provide over $100 billion in tax relief in terms of incentives for new plants, new small businesses, new technologies, new housing, and for middle-class families. And we have $140 billion of spending cuts. Invest and grow. Raise some more money. Spend the money on tax incentives to have growth in the private sector. Take the money from the defense cuts and reinvest it in new transportation and communications and environmental cleanup systems. This will work. On this, as on so many other issues, I have a fundamental difference from the present administration. I don't believe trickle-down economics will work. Unemployment is up. Most people are working harder for less money than they were making 10 years ago. I think we can do better if we have the courage to change.
Mr. President, a response.
I have 1 minute, just the ground rules here.
Well, yeah, roughly 1 minute. We can okay. Loosen that up a little bit, but go ahead.
He doesn't like trickle-down government, but I think he's talking about the Reagan-Bush years where we created 15 million jobs. The rich are paying a bigger percent of the total tax burden, and what I don't like is trickle-down government. And therein, I think Governor Clinton keeps talking about trickle-down, and he's still talking about spending more and taxing more. Government, he says, invest government, grow government. Government doesn't create jobs. If they do, they're make-work jobs. It's the private sector that creates jobs. And yes, we've got too many taxes on the American people. And
Now, Mr. President, Senator, you all, I'm sure, are aware of this. Let me remind you, when we, at 9 o'clock straight up, we go on the air, but there's a minute and 15 seconds before I actually say good evening for the networks to put us on the air and all that sort of business. So we're going to get two hard cues, and then we'll know we're on the air when I say good evening, when we're actually doing the thing, okay? But they might be getting shots and stuff before that.
We're not going to leave, are we?
No.
I was afraid we'd give our openings and we wouldn't be able to do it again.
The audio works, by the way. That's good. Good. Yeah, everything checks out. Pictures are coming out all right. Everything's fine. All right, 1 minute. 1 minute to silence. Not y'all, not you, them.
Rising incomes, in America, strong peace.
30 seconds, we're on. Good evening from the Bushnell Theater in Hartford, Connecticut. I'm Jim Lara of the NewsHour on PBS. Welcome to the first of the 1996 presidential debates between President Bill Clinton, the Democratic nominee, and Senator Bob Dole, the Republican nominee. This event is sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. It will last 90 minutes following a format and rules worked out by the two campaigns. There will be 2-minute opening and closing statements. In between, a series of questions, each having 3 parts: a 90-second answer, a 60-second rebuttal, and a 30-second response. I will assist the candidates in adhering to those time limits with the help of a series of lights visible to both. Under their rules, the candidates are not allowed to question each other directly. I will ask the questions. There are no limitations on the subjects. The order for everything tonight was determined by coin toss. Now, to the opening statements and to President Clinton. Mr. President.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to the people of Hartford, our hosts. I want to begin by saying again how much I respect Senator Dole and his record of public service, and how hard I will try to make this campaign and this debate one of ideas, not insults. 4 years ago, I ran for president at a time of high unemployment and rising frustration. I wanted to turn this country around with a program of opportunity for all, responsibility from all, and an American community where everybody has a role to play. I wanted a government that was smaller and less bureaucratic to help people have the tools to make the most of their own lives. 4 years ago, you took me on faith. Now, there's a record. 10.5 million more jobs, rising incomes, falling crime rates and welfare rolls, a strong America at peace. We are better off than we were 4 years ago. Let's keep it going. We cut the deficit by 60%. Now let's balance the budget and protect Medicare, Medicaid, education, and the environment. We cut taxes for 15 million working Americans. Now let's pass the tax cuts for education and child rearing, help with medical emergencies and buying a home. We passed family and medical leave. Now let's expand it so more people can succeed as parents and in the workforce. We passed 100,000 police, the assault weapons ban, the Brady Bill. Now let's keep going by finishing the work of putting the police on the street and tackling juvenile gangs. We passed welfare reform. Now let's move 1 million people from welfare to work. And most important, let's make education our highest priority so that every 8-year-old will be able to read, every 12-year-old can log on to the internet, every 18-year-old can go to college. We can build that bridge to the 21st century, and I look forward to discussing exactly how we're going to do it.
Senator Dole, 2 minutes.
Yes, welcome to the second 1996 presidential debate between Senator Bob Dole, the Republican nominee, and President Bill Clinton, the Democratic nominee. It is sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. We will follow a town hall type format tonight. The questions over the next 90 minutes will come from 113 citizens of the greater San Diego area. They were chosen in the past week by the Gallup organization to represent a rough cross-section of voters as to political views, age, gender, and other factors. Each said he or she is undecided about this presidential race. They were told to come tonight with questions. Nobody from the Debate Commission or the two campaigns has any idea what those questions are, neither do I. We will all be hearing them for the first time at the same time. I met with this group 3 hours ago, and we spoke only about how it was going to work tonight. They are sitting in 5 sections. I will call on individuals at random, moving from one section to another with each new question, alternating the questions between the two candidates. My job is to keep things fair and the subjects as clear and as varied as possible. The rules drawn by the campaigns are basically the same as they were for the Hartford and St. Petersburg debates: 90-second answers, 60-second rebuttals, 30-second responses for each question. The candidates are not allowed to question each other directly. There will be 2-minute opening and closing statements. The order for this evening was set by coin toss. We begin now with Senator Dole and his opening statement. Senator Dole.
Thank you very much, Jim. Let me first give you a sports update. The Braves won, the Cardinals nothing, early on. I want to thank you, and I want to thank everybody here tonight. I want a special thanks to my wife, Elizabeth, my daughter, Robin, for their love and support, and thank the people who are listening or watching all over America. In 20 days, you will help decide who will lead this country into the next century. It's an awesome responsibility. And you must ask yourself, do you know enough about the candidates? You should know as much as possible about each of us. Sometimes the views have been distorted, been millions and millions of dollars in negative advertising spent distorting my views, but I hope tonight you'll get a better feel of who Bob Dole is and what he's all about. And I think first I should understand that the question on your mind is, do I understand your problem? Would I understand it if it occurred to me? And I might just say that I'm from a large family. I got lots of relatives, and they're good, average, middle-class, hard-working Americans. They live all across the country. They're not all Republicans, maybe all but one. But in any event, I understand the problems. Whether it's two parents working because one has to pay the taxes and one has to provide for the family, whether it's a single parent who just barely pays the pressing bills, or whether you're worried about an education for your children, going to the best schools, or whether you're worried about safe playgrounds, drug-free schools, crime-free schools. This is what this election is all about. And hopefully tonight, when we conclude this debate, you will have a better understanding, and the viewing and listening audience will have a better understanding. Thank you.
Mr. President, 2 minutes, opening statement.
And I welcome you to the first of 3 90-minute debates between the Democratic candidate for president, Vice President Al Gore, and the Republican candidate, Governor George W. Bush of Texas. The debates are sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates, and they will be conducted within formats and rules agreed to by the Commission and the two campaigns. Tonight's will have the candidates at podiums. No answer to a question can exceed 2 minutes. Rebuttals are limited to 1 minute. But as moderator, I have the option to follow up and to extend any particular give and take another 3.5 minutes. But even then, no single answer can exceed 2 minutes. The candidates, under their rules, may not question each other directly. There will be no opening statements, but each candidate may have up to 2 minutes for a closing statement. The questions and the subjects were chosen by me alone. I have told no one from the two campaigns or the Commission or anyone else involved
what they are. There's a small audience in the hall tonight. They are not here to participate, only to listen. I have asked and they have agreed to remain silent for the next 90 minutes, except for right now, when they will applaud as we welcome the two candidates, Governor Bush and Vice President Gore. And now the first question, as determined by a flip of a coin, it goes to Vice President Gore. Vice President Gore, you have questioned whether Governor Bush has the experience to be President of the United States. What exactly do you mean?
Well, Jim, first of all, I would like to thank the sponsors of this debate and the people of Boston for hosting the debate. I'd like to thank Governor Bush for participating, and I'd like to say I'm happy to be here with Tipper and our family. I have actually not questioned Governor Bush's experience. I have questioned his proposals, and here's why. I think this is a very important moment for our country. We have achieved extraordinary prosperity, and in this election, America has to make an important choice. Will we use our prosperity to enrich not just the few, but all of our families? I believe we have to make the right and responsible choices. If I'm entrusted with the presidency, here are the choices that I will make. I'll balance the budget every year. I will pay down the national debt. I will put Medicare and Social Security in a lockbox and protect them. And I will cut taxes for middle-class families. I believe it's important to resist the temptation to squander our surplus. If we make the right choices, we can have a prosperity that endures and enriches all of our people. If I'm entrusted with the presidency, I will help parents and strengthen families. Because, you know, if we have prosperity that grows and grows, we still won't be successful unless we strengthen families by, for example, ensuring that children can always go to schools that are safe, by giving parents the tools to protect their children against cultural pollution. I will make sure that we invest in our country and our families. And I mean investing in education, health care, the environment, and middle-class tax cuts and retirement security. That's my agenda, and that's why I think that it's not just a question of experience.
Governor Bush, 1 minute rebuttal.
Well, we do come from different places. I come from West Texas. I've been a governor. A governor is the chief executive officer and learns how to set agendas. And I think you're going to find the difference reflected in our budgets. I want to take 1/2 of the surplus and dedicate it to Social Security, 1/4 of the surplus for important projects, and I want to send 1/4 of the surplus back to the people who pay the bills. I want everybody who pays taxes to have their tax rates cut. Now that stands in contrast to my worthy opponent's plan, which will increase the size of government dramatically. His plan is 3 times larger than President Clinton's proposed plan 8 years ago. It's a plan that will have 200 new programs as well, or expanded programs. It'll create 20,000 new bureaucrats. In other words, it empowers Washington. And tonight you're going to hear that my passion and my vision is to empower Americans to be able to make decisions for themselves in their own lives.
So I take it by your answer then, Mr. Vice, this enormous power.
I have. First question is, what's in the best interest of the United States? What's in the best interests of our people? When it comes to foreign policy, that'll be my guiding question. Is it in our nation's interests? Peace in the Middle East is in our nation's interests. Having a hemisphere that is free for trade and peaceful is in our nation's interests. Strong relations in Europe is in our nation's interest. I've thought a lot about what it means to be the president. I also understand that an administration is not one person, but an administration is dedicated citizens who are called by the president to serve the country, to serve a cause greater than self. And so I've thought about an administration of people who represent all America, but people who understand my compassionate and conservative philosophy. I haven't started naming names except for one person, and that's Mr. Richard Cheney, who I thought did a great job the other night. He's a vice presidential nominee who represents, who I think people got to see why I picked him. He's a man of solid judgment, and he's going to be a person to stand by my side. One of the things I've done in Texas is I've been able to put together a good team of people. I've been able to set clear goals. The goals ought to be an education system that leaves no child behind, Medicare for our seniors, a Social Security system that's safe and secure, foreign policy that's in our nation's interest, and a strong military. And then bring people together to achieve those goals. That's what a chief executive officer does. So I've thought long and hard about the honor of being the President of the United States.
Vice President Gore?
Yes, Jim, I've thought a lot about that particular question, and I see our greatest national strength coming from what we stand for in the world. I see it as a question. Hey, Jim. How you doing?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. How you doing?
Governor? Welcome. Nice to see you.
Howdy. How are you all?
Before proceeding tonight, we would like to observe a moment of silence in memory of Governor Mel Carnahan of Missouri, who, along with his son and his former chief of staff, died in a private plane crash last night in St. Louis. A reminder, as we continue now, that these debates are sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. The formats and the rules were worked out by the Commission and the two campaigns. Tonight's questions will be asked by St. Louis area voters who were identified as being uncommitted by the Gallup organization. Earlier today, each of them wrote a question on a small card like this. Those cards were collected and then given to me this afternoon. My job, under the rules of the evening, was to decide the order the questions will be asked and to call on the questioners accordingly. I also have the option of asking follow-ups, which, in order to get to more of the panel's questions, for the record, I plan to do sparingly and mostly for clarifications. The audience participants are bound by the following rule. They shall not ask follow-up questions or otherwise participate in the extended discussion, and the questioner's microphone will be turned off after he or she completes asking the question. Those are the rules. As in Winston-Salem last week, no single answer or response from a candidate can exceed 2 minutes. There is an audience here in the hall, and they have promised to remain absolutely quiet, as did their predecessors this year in Boston, Danville, and Winston-Salem. Before we begin, a correction from last week's debate. I was wrong when I said Vice President Gore's campaign commercials had called Governor Bush a bumbler. That specific charge was made in a press statement by Gore campaign spokesman Mark Fabiani, not in a TV guide.
I'm glad you clarified that.
In a TV ad. Now, let's go to the first question. Of over the 130 questions we received from this panel, we will begin with one of the 19 on health issues, and it goes to you, Mr. Vice President, and it will be asked by James Hankins. Mr. Hankins?
How do you feel about HMOs and insurance companies making the critical decisions that affect people's lives instead of the medical professionals? And why are the HMOs and insurance companies not held accountable for their decisions?
Mr. Hankins, I don't feel good about it, and I think we ought to have a patient's Bill of Rights to take the medical decisions away from the HMOs and give them back to the doctors and the nurses. I want to come back and tell you why, but if you will forgive me, I would like to say something right now at the beginning of this debate, following on the moment of silence for Mel Carnahan and Randy Carnahan and Chris Sifford. Tipper and I were good friends with Mel and Randy, and I know that all of us here want to extend our sympathy and condolences to Gene and the family and to the Sifford family. And I'd just like to say that this debate, in a way, is a living tribute to Mel Carnahan, because he loved the vigorous discussion of ideas in our democracy. He was a fantastic governor of Missouri. This state became one of the top 5 in the nation for health care coverage for children under his leadership, one of the best in advancing all kinds of benefits for children to grow up healthy and strong. And of course, this debate also takes place at a time when the tragedy of the USS Cole is on our minds and hearts. And insofar as the memorial services tomorrow, I would like to also extend sympathy to the families of those who have died and those who are still missing, and the injured. Now, Mr. Hankins, I think that the situation that you describe has gotten completely out of hand. Doctors are giving prescriptions, they're recommending treatments, and then their recommendations are being overruled by HMOs and insurance companies. That is unacceptable. I support a strong national patient's Bill of Rights. It is actually a disagreement between us. The national law that is pending on this, the Dingell-Norwood bill, a bipartisan bill, is one that I support and that the governor does not.
2 minutes response, Governor Bush. The NewsHour on PBS, and I welcome you to the first of the 2004 presidential debates between President George W. Bush, the Republican nominee, and Senator John Kerry, the Democratic nominee. These debates are sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. Tonight's will last 90 minutes, following detailed rules of engagement worked out by representatives of the candidates. I have agreed to enforce their rules on them. The umbrella topic is foreign policy and homeland security, but the specific subjects were chosen by me, the questions were composed by me, the candidates have not been told what they are, nor has anyone else. For each question, there can only be a 2-minute response, a 90-second rebuttal, and at my discretion, a discussion extension of 1 minute. A green light will come on when 30 seconds remain in any given answer, yellow at 15, red at 5 seconds, and then flashing red means time's up. There is also a backup buzzer system if needed. Candidates may not direct a question to each other. There will be 2-minute closing statements, but no opening statements. There is an audience here in the hall, but they will remain absolutely silent for the next 90 minutes, except for now, when they join me in welcoming President Bush and Senator Kerry. Good evening, Mr. President, Senator Kerry. As determined by a coin toss, the first question goes to you, Senator Kerry. You have 2 minutes. Do you believe you could do a better job than President Bush in preventing another 9/11 type terrorist attack on the United States?
Yes, I do. But before I answer further, let me thank you for moderating. I want to thank the University of Miami for hosting us, and I know the President will join me in welcoming all of Florida to this debate. You've been through the roughest weeks anybody could imagine. Our hearts go out to you, and we admire your pluck and perseverance. I can make America safer than President Bush has made us, and I believe President Bush and I both love our country equally, but we just have a different set of convictions about how you make America safe. I believe America is safest and strongest when we are leading the world and when we are leading strong alliances. I'll never give a veto to any country over our security, but I also know how to lead those alliances. This president has left them in shatters across the globe, and we're now 90% of the casualties in Iraq and 90% of the costs. I think that's wrong, and I think we can do better. I have a better plan for Homeland Security. I have a better plan to be able to fight the war on terror by strengthening our military, strengthening our intelligence, by going after the financing more authoritatively, by doing what we need to do to rebuild the alliances, by reaching out to the Muslim world, which the president has almost not done, and beginning to isolate the radical Islamic Muslims, not have them isolate the United States of America. I know I can do a better job in Iraq, where I have a plan to have a summit with all of the allies, something this president has not yet achieved, not yet been able to do to bring people to the table. We can do a better job of training the Iraqi forces to defend themselves, and I know that we can do a better job of preparing for elections. All of these, and especially Homeland Security, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Mr. President, you have 90-second rebuttal.
I too thank the University of Miami and say our prayers are with the good people of this state who've suffered a lot. September the 11th changed how America must look at the world. And since that day, our nation has been on a multi-pronged strategy to keep our country safer. We pursued al-Qaeda wherever al-Qaeda tries to hide. 75% of known al-Qaeda leaders have been brought to justice. The rest of them know we're after them. We've upheld the doctrine that said if you harbor a terrorist, you're equally as guilty as a terrorist, and the Taliban no longer in power. 10 million people have registered to vote in Afghanistan in the upcoming presidential election. In Iraq, we saw a threat, and we realized that after September the 11th,
I welcome you to the second of the 2004 presidential debates between President George W. Bush, the Republican nominee, and Senator John Kerry, the Democratic nominee. The debates are sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. Tonight's format is going to be a bit different. We have assembled a town hall meeting. We're in the show me state, as everyone knows Missouri to be, so Missouri residents will ask the questions. These 140 citizens were identified by the Gallup organization as not yet committed in this election. Now, earlier today, each audience member gave me 2 questions on cards like this. One they'd like to ask of the president, the other they'd like to ask the senator. I have selected the questions to be asked and the order. No one has seen the final list of questions but me, certainly not the candidates. No audience member knows if he or she will be called upon. Audience microphones will be turned off after a question is asked. Audience members will address their question to a specific candidate. He'll have 2 minutes to answer. The other candidate will have 1.5 minutes for rebuttal, and I have the option of extending discussion for 1 minute to be divided equally between the 2 men. All subjects are open for discussion. And you probably know the light system by now. Green light at 30 seconds, yellow at 15, red at 5, and flashing red means you're done. Those are the candidates' rules. I will hold the candidates to the time limits forcefully, but politely, I hope. And now, please join me in welcoming with great respect President Bush and Senator Kerry. Gentlemen, to the business at hand. The first question is for Senator Kerry, and it will come from Cheryl Otis, who is right behind me.
Senator Kerry, after talking to several co-workers and family and friends,
I asked the ones who said they were not voting for you why. They said that you were too wishy-washy. Do you have a reply for them?
Yes, I certainly do. But let me just first, Cheryl, if you will, I want to thank Charlie for moderating. I want to thank Washington University for hosting us here this evening. Mr. President, it's good to be with you again this evening, sir. Cheryl, the President didn't find weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, so he's really turned his campaign into a weapon of mass deception. And the result is that you've been bombarded with advertisements suggesting that I've changed a position on this or that or the other. Now, the three things they try to say I've changed position on are the Patriot Act. I haven't. I support it. I just don't like the way John Ashcroft has applied it. And we're going to change a few things. The chairman of the Republican Party thinks we ought to change a few things. No Child Left Behind Act. I voted for it. I support it. I support the goals. But the president has underfunded it by $28 billion. Right here in St. Louis, you've laid off 350 teachers. You're 150, I think it's a little more, about $100 million shy of what you ought to be under the No Child Left Behind Act to help your education system here. So I complain about that. I've argued that we should fully fund it. The president says, I've changed my mind. I haven't changed my mind. I'm going to fully fund it. So these are the differences. Now, the president has presided over the economy where we've lost 1.6 million jobs. First president in 72 years to lose jobs. I have a plan to put people back to work. That's not wishy-washy. I'm going to close the loopholes that actually encourage companies to go overseas. The president wants to keep them open. I think I'm right. I think he's wrong. I'm going to give you a tax cut. The president gave the top 1% of income earners in America got $89 billion last year, more than the 80% of people who earn $100,000 or less all put together. I think that's wrong. That's not wishy-washy, and that's what I'm fighting for, you.
Welcome you to the third and last of the 2004 debates between President George Bush and Senator John Kerry. As Jim Lira told you before the first one, these debates are sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. Tonight, the topic will be domestic affairs, but the format will be the same as that first debate. I'll moderate our discussion under detailed rules agreed to by the candidates. But the questions and the areas to be covered were chosen by me. I have not told the candidates or anyone else what they are. To refresh your memory on the rules, I will ask a question. The candidate is allowed 2 minutes to answer. His opponent then has 1.5 minutes to offer a rebuttal. At my discretion, I can extend the discussion by offering each candidate an additional 30 seconds. A green light will come on to signal the candidate has 30 seconds left. A yellow light signals 15 seconds left. A red light means 5 seconds left. There is also a buzzer if it is needed. The candidates may not question each other directly. There are no opening statements, but there will be 2-minute closing statements. There is an audience here tonight, but they have agreed to remain silent, except for right now, when they join me in welcoming President George Bush and Senator John Kerry. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. By coin toss, the first question goes to Senator Kerry. Senator, I want to set the stage for this discussion by asking the question that I think hangs over all of our politics today and is probably on the minds of many people watching this debate tonight, and that is, will our children and grandchildren ever live in a world as safe and secure as the world in which we grew up?
Well, first of all, Bob, thank you for moderating tonight. Thank you, Arizona State, for welcoming us. And thank you to the Presidential Commission for undertaking this enormous task. We're proud to be here. Mr. President, I'm glad to be here with you again to share similarities and differences with the American people. Will we ever be safe and secure again? Yes, we absolutely must be. That's the goal. Now, how do we achieve it is the most critical component of it. I believe that this president, regrettably, rushed us into a war, made decisions about foreign policy, pushed alliances away, and as a result, America is now bearing this extraordinary burden where we are not as safe as we ought to be. The measurement is not, are we safer? The measurement is, are we as safe as we ought to be? And there are a host of options that this president had available to him, like making sure that at all our ports in America, containers are inspected. Only 95% of them, 95% come in today uninspected. That's not good enough. People who fly on airplanes today, the cargo hold is not x-rayed, but the baggage is. That's not good enough. Firehouses don't have enough firefighters in them. Police officers are being cut from the streets of America because the president decided to cut the COPS program. So we can do a better job of Homeland Security. I can do a better job of waging a smarter, more effective war on terror and guarantee that we go after the terrorists. I will hunt them down and we'll kill them, we'll capture them, we'll do whatever necessary to be safe. But I pledge this to you, America. I will do it in the way that Franklin Roosevelt and Ronald Reagan and John Kennedy and others did, where we build the strongest alliances, where the world joins together, where we have the best intelligence, and where we are able ultimately to be more safe and secure.
Mr. President, you have 90 seconds.
Bob, thank you very much. I want to thank Arizona State as